The Collaboration Chapter 5 Switched Off, Part 4. The associate producer, who of course under no obligation to speak to Gisling, picked up the phone. I naturally received several calls from Dr. Gisling, the German consul, and could not avoid talking with him, which I did. He was well aware, I don't know through whom, that we were making a Dreyfus picture, and he was very much worried in what respect Germany would figure in this. He wanted to make a date with me immediately and wanted further information in regard to this. I presume in order that he might notify Washington, or his government. I succeeded in telling him that the Dreyfus case plays a very small part in our picture. This seems to have satisfied him very much, and I hope we won't hear from him any further. A few days after this phone call took place, Jack Warner dictated some important changes to the Dreyfus picture, which would eventually be titled The Life of Emile Zola. Scene 80. Start the speech of the Chief of Staff with, "He's a man," losing the line, "and a Jew." Scene 190. Do not use the word Jew in the speech by the Commander of Paris. Use Dreyfus's name instead. Scene 235. Use Dreyfus's name here, again instead of that Jew. After all of Warner's changes had been implemented, the word Jew was not spoken a single time in the life of Emile Zola. The only reference that remained was a shot of a piece of paper on which Dreyfus's religion was written, and before the film was released, there was a request for this to be cut too. Take out that last part of the insert where the finger runs across under the line religion Jew. But for some reason, the request was not carried out, and, hard as it may be to believe, this 1-second shot turned out to be one of the few explicit references to a Jew in American cinema for the remainder of the 1930s. This unfortunate episode revealed what an aggressive figure George Gisling had become. He had dared to exert his influence over a studio that he had expelled from the German market. He was obviously prepared to adopt harsher methods against the studios still doing business in Germany, and 1 year after the cancellation of It Can't Happen Here, he went further than anyone had expected. Back in 1931, the foundation for the agreement between the Hollywood studios and the German government had been laid when the head of Universal Pictures, Karl Laemmle, had edited All Quiet on the Western Front in accordance with the wishes of the German Foreign Office. In 1932, Laemmle had continued along the same path by postponing the sequel to All Quiet on the Western Front, entitled The Road Back. Naturally, the German Foreign Office had observed, at the time, Universal's interest in collaboration is not platonic, but arises from the company's interest in its Berlin branch and in the German market. In April 1936, Karl Laemmle lost control of Universal Pictures, and the American financier and sportsman John Sevier Cowden had become the new chairman of the company. Cowden found the old script of The Road Back, and, given Universal Pictures' vastly reduced business in Germany, he put the film back into production. When this story originally came in 4 or 5 years ago, a Universal Pictures employee explained to the Hayes office, we were loath to produce the same then, solely due to the jeopardy in which its production would have placed our German business at the time. However, since the situation with regard to the American film industry has completely changed, we are now ready and anxious to produce this story. In fact, despite this proclamation, Universal Pictures had not lost interest in the German market. In February 1937, soon after reviving The Road Back, Cowden made a business trip to Berlin, and according to the U.S. ambassador, he made an unusual offer to the Nazi authorities. The company in question was previously controlled by Jewish interests, but after recent reorganization, it is understood that it is now non-Jewish. The representative mentioned had certain discussions with government officials and film interests with a view to explaining this particular point. He has reported success in convincing them in the matter, and thereafter a plan was considered whereby, probably in collaboration with German interests, his company might re-enter the German market. In a very sly way, Cowden was attempting to make Universal Pictures the preeminent American studio in Germany. For those taking score, that's one of the questions Mr. Rabel gave us. He had non-Jewish origins on his side, and now he had The Road Back as a bargaining chip. If his company were allowed to re-enter the German market, he could agree to make the picture palatable from the German standpoint. He held numerous meetings with propaganda ministry officials, and he repeatedly assured them that everything would be done to make the film apolitical, and that he was very interested in cultivating good relations with Germany. Cowden remained true to his word. In the book on which the film was based, a group of German soldiers had returned from the World War, and had clashed with their former officers in the streets in the aftermath of the revolution. Since this contradicted the Nazis' interpretation of the post-war period, Cowden instructed his screenwriters to make major changes. In the new script, there were jokes at the expense of the revolutionaries. The officers were portrayed sympathetically, and the conflicts between the two groups were, as Cowden had promised, apolitical. George Gisling did not know about these changes, however, so when he heard that Universal Pictures was going ahead with The Road Back, he sent a letter of protest to Joseph Breen in the Hayes office. Breen then met with the director, James Whale, and he asked Whale about the scene in which the revolutionaries clashed with the army officers. Whale insisted that the scene would be shot in such a way as to remove any possible danger. He further stated that he had so changed the story from the book that the finished picture was not likely to give serious offense to anybody, and more especially to the Germans. As if to prove his point, Whale agreed to meet with Gisling and to iron out any problems directly with him. The meeting took place 1 month later at Whale's home near Santa Monica. An account of the conversation between the film director and the Nazi consul had survived, and it is worth quoting at length because it conveys Gisling's increased sense of entitlement since the cancellation of It Can't Happen Here. Consul Gisling, characteristically, never openly threatened in his attitude. He simply insisted he'd be very sorry to have to take countermeasures. The script for The Road Back was shown to him, but he would give no reply as to whether it satisfied the requirements of the Nazi regime. It was pointed out that nothing in the story in any way represented Nazi Germany, since it deals with a period immediately after the end of World War I. Not a word is said at any point about Hitler or Nazism. In fact, the story makes fun of inadequacies of the leading social democratic politicians of the time for their failure to take decisive steps in fulfillment of their program. Dr. Gisling had the monumental cheek to suggest that the author, Erich Remarque, famed German novelist, should not be given screen credit in the completed picture. This, of course, the studio representatives were unable to grant. Consul Gisling again insinuated that he would be very sorry to have to be forced to report to his government that the picture was unsatisfactory. A few weeks later, Gisling had a second meeting about the roadblock. He visited the Universal Studio lot and he watched an early version of the picture. Once again, however, he refused to commit himself in any way. Then on April 1st, 1937, Gisling made his boldest move yet. He had already threatened to invoke Article 15 of the German film regulations against several major Hollywood studios. Now he threatened to invoke it against individuals. He sent letters to around 60 people involved in The Road Back. Oh, I lost where I was going. Oh, fuck. He sent letters to around 60 people involved in The Road Back. The director, the entire cast, even the wardrobe man. And he warned them that any films in which they participated in the future might be banned in Germany. This was a shocking move, and it created an uproar. George Gisling had directly threatened American film workers for their activities on home soil. He had used the U.S. Postal Service to frighten and intimidate individuals who were just going about their regular business. Universal Studios told everyone to keep the matter a secret, but the news quickly leaked out. Several actors sought out legal advice, complaints were lodged with the State Department, and one member of the Hayes office hoped that Gisling would finally be expelled on account of his viciousness. In the days that followed, the matter was considered at the highest level. A representative of the Secretary of State met with the counselor of the German embassy in Washington, D.C., and asked whether Gisling had been acting under the direct instructions of his supervisors. The counselor replied that he had. The American representatives pointed out that such actions did not fall within the proper functions of a consular officer, and then emphasized that he did not want to lodge an official complaint. He simply asked the counselor to bring the matter up with the German government and insisted that we would consider the whole matter to have been discussed only through this informal approach, that we are looking into the matter, and that my conversation with him was not considered to be a protest. In the meantime, Universal Pictures made 21 cuts to the road back and sent the new print off to the German ambassador, Hans Heinrich Dickhoff. Diekhoff. By this stage, there were hardly anything in this film to which the ambassador could object. So many scenes had been cut out that the plot barely made any sense. The ending, which had criticized the rise of militarism in Germany, now criticized the rise of militarism all around the world. The film was a muddled piece of work, and there was little risk that it would offend anyone. Nevertheless, the German government was through with Universal Pictures. The company was not permitted to resume operations in Berlin. For Gisling, on the other hand, the news was less bleak. The German Foreign Office sent a brief, unapologetic letter to the State Department to explain that the consul in Los Angeles had been instructed not to issue future warnings to American citizens. As a result, the State Department considered the matter closed. Not only was Gisling permitted to remain in his position, but within a few days he was defending his actions to the press. I have been authorized by His Excellency, the German ambassador in Washington, D.C., to deny empathetically reports that I have been rebuked by the German government for having issued on instruction warnings to some Hollywood actors in connection with the making of a certain film. All reports to the contrary are just fiction and fabrications not based on any facts. Gisling had acted boldly and successfully. 14 months after MGM's abandonment of It Can't Happen Here, he had managed to terrorize an entire community. Very soon, with his name cleared, he was back to his usual methods. He read in the trade papers that another film about the World War was being made, so he wrote to the Hays office. I feel a little alarmed, as I hear that the film The Lancer Spy, which is under production at Westwood, Fox, will contain several scenes apparently objectionable from the German standpoint. Will you, therefore, be kind enough to give me this matter your attention? The more, as from what I hear, many Fox films are being shown in Germany at this time. He followed this with a second letter that contained the same obvious threat. The production of film of such a character will arouse very bad feeling in Germany against the producing company, and may lead to serious difficulties which should be avoided in mutual interests. The Hays office forwarded these letters to 20th Century Fox, and soon afterward, Gisling was invited to preview Lancer Spy. He did not like what he saw. In his opinion, none of the German officials in the film were portrayed sympathetically. He also felt the film was even more dangerous than The Road Back, because it was so thrilling and entertaining. At the end of the screening, he made some suggestions, and 3 months later, he was invited to the studio lot to watch the new version of Lancer Spy. He still did not like it. He thought that, ideally, half of it should be reshot, but he agreed that several changes had been made. Consequently, 20th Century Fox was permitted to continue doing business in Germany. In all of these dealings with the Hollywood studios, Gisling was doing something very strategic. He was objecting to a series of films about the World War. Captured! Rendezvous, The Road Back, Lancer Spy, when his real target lay elsewhere. Ever since he heard about the Mad Dog of Europe, he had understood that Hollywood was capable of producing a much more damaging type of film from his perspective. A film that attacked Nazi Germany. His reaction to The Road Back was therefore carefully calculated. He was focusing his energies on the films set in the past in an attempt to prevent the studios from moving into the present. He was acting shocked and outraged by a few titles that had all but lost their relevance, so that the studios would not dare to embark on something truly dangerous. He had managed to bring about significant changes to a series of movies about the war, but for him, the real benefits were still to come. In May of 1937, 1 month after Gisling issued his warnings to the actors, the very film that he had objected to years earlier, The Mad Dog of Europe, was put back into production. The agent, Al Rosen, who still owned the film rights, had conducted a survey of tens of thousands of people and had determined that 82% of Americans now supported the picture. Rosen cast several well-known actors in leading roles, and he announced that he was not releasing their names to the press in light of Gisling's recent actions. Soon, rumors started circulating that John Ray, the down-and-out farmer in Mr. Deeds Goes to Town, had been cast as Hitler, and that Sam Jaff, the high priest in Lost Horizon, had been cast as the persecuted Jewish professor. Gisling quickly swung into action. He informed the propaganda ministry that the Mad Dog of Europe would be extremely detrimental to Germany, and he recommended that a warning be issued to the Hayes office. He continued, although the Hayes office, which is not affiliated with New Era's Productions, that's Al Rosen's company, will declare that it will have nothing to do with this, it would nevertheless convey the warning to its member companies, the major Hollywood studios. These companies would then, at the very least, warn the prominent actors against participating in the film, because their employability in future films would be restricted. Not surprisingly, the production plans for the new version of The Mad Dog of Europe never went ahead. As Gisling knew, though, the real danger at this point was not that a minor production company would embark on an anti-Nazi film, it was that a major Hollywood studio would do so. At the volume of Erich Maria Remarque's trilogy, Three Comrades, which was prime Hollywood material, had just been published in the United States, whereas All Quiet on the Western Front had been about the World War, and The Road Back had been about its aftermath. Three Comrades was set in the late 1920s, when the Nazis were emerging as a significant political force. The novel told the story of three war veterans, Gottfried Lenz, Robert Lohkamp, and Otto Koster, who were struggling to survive in a broken Germany. As they worked hard to keep their auto repair shop open, Lenz discovered politics. Lohkamp discovered love, and Koster tried to keep his comrades together. In the end, though, defeat was inevitable. Lenz was shot on the street by a stormtrooper. Lohkamp's wife died of tuberculosis. And Three Comrades ended without hope and without meaning. Unlike All Quiet on the Western Front and The Road Back, which had been produced by Universal Pictures, the film rights to Three Comrades were in the possession of MGM. The company considered canceling the pictures when Gisling threatened the actors, but eventually decided to push ahead with it, and the screenwriter of The Road Back came up with something politically innocuous. In May 1937, MGM sent the script to Joseph Breen in the Hayes office for inspection. Breen could not have been particularly surprised to receive it, for he had already read 3 typical letters from George Gisling on the subject. I beg to say that I still feel a little concerned about the Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer's alleged plan to film the Remarque story, titled Three Comrades, etc. Still, as sensitive as Breen was to the concerns of the Nazi consul, he could not find anything wrong with the script. He wrote to MGM to say that it met the requirements of the production code,